Look, I've signed on literally 2 years ago to try and support Ukraine. I detest bullies, and I saw it in those simple terms of Russia, a brutal dictatorship, bullying a democratic nation who was struggling to emerge still really from the Soviet Union days and become the kind of nation that it wants to be. I thought being on the side of Ukraine was the moral side, the right side, and good against evil. And that's why I sort of been supporting in every way I possibly can. As part of our support from Canada, Canada gave Ukrainian citizens more than 700,000 visas to come to Canada, those who were fleeing, particularly from the eastern part of the country, which was brutalized by Russia, who had no homes, no jobs, their families were dispersed. Sometimes members were killed. We gave more than 700,000 visas. Certainly a significant number of Ukrainians have come to Canada to escape that conflagration, that horrible period of time that they are going through. But those visas, if they're not exercised, expire on 31 March of this year. They were for 3 years, if I recall. And there is now a feeling, and I know Foreign Affairs has talked about this, that a lot of people who are in Europe, in the western part of Ukraine, may in fact realize that they're expiring. They'll realize it and may exercise their right to come to Canada with those visas in the next 2 months. So we could end up with anywhere from 80 to 100, 125,000 brand new Ukrainian refugees coming to Canada literally before the end of March. And so that in itself is a massive influx for which we are unprepared, completely unprepared. But that is not standing by itself. Those individuals, if they do come to Canada seeking a place of refuge and a place to start a life and live a life with their families, they're going to be in addition to the normal people that are coming from so many countries around the world to seek refuge, to seek political asylum, come here as immigrant status, to come here as international students, or to come here illegally. And obviously we get lots of those too. And so we have a crisis in everything because we don't have a vision, a strategy, a plan, and preparation for them. We don't have a vision of how we're going to house them and how we're going to give them medical care and how we're going to help them get educated and how we're going to find them jobs, because most of those people, they have no reverse on them. They want to work, and we don't have a strategy. And I think that, we can actually do this. We need a strategy from the national level that brings in the provinces and brings in the larger municipalities. We did it before many times. We did it in 2015, 2016 with the 50,000 Syrian refugees. I had called for Canada as a great nation to do more, and we did 50,000. We had a national approach to it. I sat in with the Governor General, David Johnson, who hosted a seminar at Rideau Hall for the provinces and for the major cities. We had guys like Mayor Mike Savage out of Halifax talk about how Halifax would respond, supported by the province and the country. And we did it. And we had John McCallum, who was the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, who brought in a guy, an incredible guy, Bernie DeReeb, and gave it to him, took it away really from the public service, gave it to him to coordinate, to make happen, and to execute. And Bernie did an awesome job. He's not yet been recognized for that.
General Rick, let's just hold on there for a sec. Yeah, let's just hold on there a sec. There's a ton of stuff we're going to drill into. So we're going to come back to that national strategy. So thank you for articulating the issue, which is big. Dominic, I'd like you to come back to this because you were recently on the ground in Ukraine. You and your wife, Julie, have a tremendous amount of experience on the ground. So tell us what you think is happening over there and how that fits into what General Rick is outlining as an issue.
Well, first, it's an honor to be on any sort of media with General Rick, and thank you for your service, General. And also just a happy Lunar New Year to everyone out there who's celebrating that today. A lot of Canadians, that's a huge day. I totally agree with everything General Rick has said. From the on-the-ground solutions that he's already laid out, saying that we're going to need to look at creating modular housing estates in very, very short order to help folks if they come in. But I wanted to pull it back a little bit to talking about that problem of the lack of the overall vision, because this doesn't just tie into the potential coming crisis with refugees, which I think we also need to put in the context of Russian politics, where the dictator in Moscow is getting ready for the latest in his long line of fake elections, and has made it really clear he would like some celebrations around that. And there are tens of thousands of Russian troops gathering along the Eastern Front in Ukraine, and real concerns about an attempt to make a major offensive push. We know the Russians don't care about lives. The timing works well for both the winter fighting season before the ground starts to get wet, and also the nice side benefit, throwing off Canada, a NATO country, and some of the other countries that have made similar commitments in terms of refugees, that if we had to deal with the arrival of even 100,000 refugees over the course of the next 2 months. In the context of a Canadian political environment where housing has become massively politicized, issues around the cost of living, standards of living for Canadians, there's a real risk that we could see Putin driving a deep wedge into the Canadian political system by making us talk about supporting Ukraine or supporting refugees. And what I loved about what General Rick has said is we can do both. And that has to be part of a broader restatement of Canada's values and a serious plan for upgrading our armed forces alongside our foreign policy so that we've got serious foreign policy officers and an Army, Navy, and Air Force ready to contribute to a mission that they understand, rather than having the armed forces be really a branch of economic development in Canada, which has too often been the tendency. So
okay, let's get back then, Dominic. Let's get back to the problem at hand. General Hillier, you saw what happened with the Syrian refugees, and so why is that, or is that not happening now, and why? Why not?
Well, no, it's not, and we haven't actually, Rick, seen the entire problem yet, because as we go forward into the spring, we're going to see the reoccurrence of a whole bunch of things which we know will happen, and that will compound the problem. Right now, homelessness, traditional homelessness, I hate to use that term, but it's the only way I can think to describe it. Traditional homelessness is at a all-time high. Those shelters are filled, they're overflowing. You know, many of our municipalities, like our cities like Hamilton, are using buses at night to pick up homeless people on the streets during this cold weather, give them an opportunity to ride around or be in a bus that's warm and then put them off and get some more, because those shelters are packed. When you have refugees coming in that now have no place to go, and people on those visas, then they're going to add even more pressure to those homeless shelters. The hotel rooms around our major towns and cities are all full. If you go into a hotel room anywhere near Pearson Airport, all you're going to hear is Ukrainian being spoken. We've topped out on that end of it. And then wait till the floods in the spring, the wildfires in the early spring and summer, and thousands of people being evacuated, as they always are. And we are going to be in crisis mode. It'd be nice to identify it before then and have some kind of approach to it that says we can't do more homeless shelters in the short term. We've tapped out on hotel rooms because otherwise we're going to shut down our economy. We can't build permanent housing in the next 2 to 3 months in the numbers that are massive. So let's find a niche type of housing, and you referred to it as the modular housing. We don't have a strategy to look at that. This is not going to be, by the way, $120 a night hotel room. This is going to be more expensive. We have to be prepared for that. But if we don't do it, we are going to have a crisis that we have not yet had to face in our nation. We haven't had that vision and strategy. We haven't had the working groups of the feds with the provinces, with the major cities, and we haven't synchronized how we're going to do it and how the money will flow and where we'll find that modular housing, for example, to get in front of this problem. We actually need to be doing it literally this week.
Okay, I've got an idea, and I'm going to come back, so hold that thought. Dominic, there's a sense of, do you not feel or do you not see a sense of Ukraine fatigue, won't say across the board, but in very strong areas? A recent poll showing the two major political parties, the number of people, if I think the numbers on the Conservatives went from 20 to 40%, people thinking, you know, we've done enough for Ukraine. I think the Liberals went from 10 to 20. But is that an issue, Dom? Is that, you know, how do you see that in the perspective of what General Hillier is trying to get done?
I think it's absolutely an issue. We're seeing, unfortunately, both of our major political parties no longer really making a point of uniting around support for Ukraine, which was one of those rare areas of consensus in our country. And I think, sadly, as we start to approach a federal election where those sorts of issues and values become a secondary concern to winning seats, that we see the Tories appealing to a more populist base that is often being fed a lot of Republican material from south of the border, and from the Liberal side, a traditional concern around prioritizing defense, which, although I don't understand it, has certainly been there as a problem for a long time. But it gets back to what General Rick was saying about, let's be bold here. Yeah, after the Second War, we built hundreds of thousands of adobe houses, those little houses across the country. And I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and there are still hundreds of those houses providing great homes for people. Also in Fredericton, there's a tech millionaire, a guy named Marcel Lebrun, who took his money from having started a very successful IT firm a number of years ago. And he's created this program called 12 Neighbors, and he's building small homes to the equivalent you see of people building homes out of shipping containers. Let's do that. Build those in large numbers, and those empty spaces in Pearson, the large places, the open spaces we have in this country in abundance. And let's use those to help the short-term problem with the Ukrainians. And then we've got something to help us with our longer-term housing crisis. And it's a way for us to energize the public and private sector to fix a short-term problem and give us some solutions to longer-term problems that have been seeming to paralyze politicians at the federal and provincial level. And that's something which I think General Rick highlighted the need to have real nimbleness in the implementation. Okay. And it's sad that what we're seeing as the fallout from COVID is a fear of bold government action, rather than those early days when we saw massive mobilization to achieve a common goal in provincial governments, the national government, and local government. Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's take that. Well, that's a good segue, Dominic. That's a good segue. General Hillier, you helped the COVID vaccine rollout in Ontario. So you've been on the ground at the front lines when a massive program has been implemented in short period of time. Is there any big logistical issues or any reason why your idea and what Dominic supports on the modular housing, why can that not happen? And it would be easy to put together a financial model on that, I think, to find out the costing. What's stopping that from happening?
Well, Rick, let me just go back, because I've got to jump on something that Dominic said there, and what you asked, in fact. Is there, or why is there, or is there Ukrainian fatigue in Canada? And absolutely, yes, there is. And I would simply say to that is, it's understandable. Where in Canada, and from who in Canada, do we hear explained to Canadians who are caught in high inflationary times, who are caught in, coming out of the COVID and a whole variety of other issues which we simply wade through, our lack of housing, et cetera, who here understands why we should be supporting Ukraine in a whole variety of ways, more than we are doing now. And part of that support includes, of course, helping their citizens escape the war when they have no other choice. And we don't have people out there explaining it. We don't have people talking to Canadians about it. I think the Ukrainian Canadian community, I was told, it's 1.5 million people. The organizations representing them or saying that they represent them have not done a powerful, positive job. And it's understandable that Canadians, like many other citizens in other countries, don't understand why we're spending money over there and why we're trying to help them out. And we've not had people explaining it for sure. So I don't think there's any, to your point now on the second question, I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't do this. We're a rich nation. We can find those dollars. It's not the kind of dollars that's going to break a nation. And if we had sort of the strategy and leadership from the federal government with the provinces included, we could do this again. We did it for the 50,000 Syrians, and right now they're simply part of the fabric of our nation. We did it, as Dominic said, right after World War II. My goodness, the Polish division that fought with that was part of 1st Canadian Army, they could not go back to Poland because the Soviets had taken over their country. The communists ruled. They all came to Canada. We welcomed them to our country. We had those mega metal shelters that sometimes you see around now as farm garages and that kind of stuff. We made homes inside of those until further housing could be built. We looked after them, and now they're a part of the strong fabric of this country. And we need to be doing the same right now. It requires leadership, and it requires a guy like John McCallum to step up and take this forward and to find the right one or two individuals to drive it through, like this guy, Bernie DeRiebe, who is a hero of Canada, and to do it in conjunction with the provinces. We can do it. We've done it before. Hey, we can do great things. We're a great nation.
Sorry, John McCallum. Why John McCallum? What's the link there?
He was the Minister of Immigration and Citizenship. He was the guy who had the responsibility to organize, bringing in. And if you remember, it was during the election in 2015, and I think the Conservatives were saying 10,000, and the Liberals were saying 15,000. And I did an interview and said, look, great nations do great things. I see your 10 and your 15. Let's up it to 50,000. That's eventually what we did. Minister McCallum handed it to a team that could actually make this happen. He effectively took it out of the federal public service. But he handed it to a team that could make it happen, working with the provinces, working with towns, working with unions and associations across the country. We now have those 50,000 Syrians who are part of the fabric of our nation, and it was done so smoothly, so seamlessly that nobody really actually noticed. It was quite incredible. We can do it again.
So, Dominic, tell me, at the provincial level then, this would take leadership, as General Hillier has talked about, at the provincial level. Do you see roadblocks, obstacles, or do you see support at the provincial level when you look at the premiers across Canada?
Well, I think having recently been part of the provincial government when I was education in New Brunswick, the housing crisis was already growing at that point over a year ago. And we were talking about how can we work with the feds? Where's the vision to solve these problems? And that was around our long-term homelessness issues, which, as General Rick said, are somewhat separate from what we're talking about now, but end up being, because it's all people who aren't secure in their housing. So the more that we can have a federal vision that talks about how the provinces can be included, the provinces can easily and quickly give an idea of what inventory they need. There can be a quid pro quo around the number of Ukrainians who go in exchange for the provincial supports that would be offered if the feds help on the housing file. There's all kinds of creativity that we can deploy here. It just needs someone and a team to be able to cut through the rubbish. And that's the example I cite back from is something that I was sad that was never copied anywhere else, was an idea that I put in place with obviously the premier decided to do it, but I drafted it up. We had an all-party COVID committee. We had all the opposition leaders and the premier sitting with a small number of cabinet ministers to guide our response to COVID all the way through the pandemic. And it led to New Brunswick for the first 18 months of the pandemic having extremely positive results. And that was because we had a team that could cut through different departments, make deputy ministers sit down together and fix things by the end of the day rather than the end of the year. And that allowed us to be incredibly nimble. And that's what we're going to need in a federal civil servants, where General Rick talks about that absence of vision we have right now. That's affecting the entire civil service, who are often afraid of treading on a minister's toes or in other departments. We need to make it clear that we are speaking with one voice as a country, and let whichever party put that idea out there to say, let's all sit down, let's put a team in place and take quick actions, because this is a question of weeks, not months or years. And the threat, again, imagine what happens if we have anything more than a couple of 100,000 Ukrainians turn up in the space of a few weeks over the next 12 weeks. This is a potentially incredibly destabilizing moment for our country. And I don't hear anyone talking about it. And this is something that we have created. We've given people this opportunity to be able to come, and we better be ready. We owe it to those refugees fleeing war, and we owe it to Canadians who we also want to maintain their support for future initiatives like this, if we want to be an open country that is able to welcome the best from around to make our country.
So General Rick, I just
jump in here, if you permit me, and say, like, I think one of the key issues that prevents us being able to actually come to grips with this and wrestle this to the ground is an overwhelming reluctance to admit that we're in a state of crises here. And I don't know if you probably did, the headlines this morning that the city of Belleville in Ontario has declared a crisis. They're in a state of emergency. And it was because of deaths, the trigger, perhaps the straw that broke the camel's back, were the deaths by drug overdose, et cetera. But when you talk to the folks in and around Belleville, it's because the compounding of the problems of drug use and a variety of other things, but in particular, the homelessness and the additional folks coming in they simply cannot handle, cause them to declare a state of emergency, a crisis. I think they're the first. And it's going to be a whole bunch of cities and towns and maybe even provinces declaring a crisis, a state of emergency, because we can't handle it. I'd love to see what Dominic referred to there. In May of 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of England and saved the world for the next sort of year and a half, if you will. And in part, he did it by bringing together a war cabinet of the different parties. And I'd love to see that come together in Canada, put together a war cabinet and let's go to war against this crisis, and let's do what a great nation like Canada can do. Never mind the political bickering. I know I'm dreaming here. Never mind the political bickering, but let's get it done for Canadians so that we don't.
Okay, well, I just came up with a price tag here. I just Googled in the 3 minutes here you were speaking. A modular home top end is $50,000. So let's take that top end $50,000 cost, probably less. If we have, no, let's take $30,000. Let's say mid-range. If we have 50,000 immigrants that are coming in, you're looking at 1.5 billion. 1.5
I think you're looking at it the wrong way, Rick. Here's what I would offer to you.
Okay, yeah.
You don't need to buy those to start with. There are two stages here. Stage one is let's house those folks coming in that get out of the airplane tomorrow at Pearson. let's send in a modular camp on 10 acres there. They have 1,000 people or 2,000 or 5,000 people, and you're going to be renting it because companies will come in and set it up. It'll cost you $500, $700 a day per person to house them, to feed them, to have them have facilities, to truck in water, to take away gray water, whatever it requires.
Sorry, Rick. So is this military? Okay, let's back up. Where is this camp? Where's this?
Hey, there are private companies that can actually do that. They can start moving it in within 72 to 96 hours. In 96 hours, have it set up and operate for the first 100 or the first 1,000. But my point is, then you start transiting people from places like Toronto, where there is no housing at all, where they need to get away from, out to towns and communities where there is housing, where there are jobs, and where they actually want those immigrants to come because they need them to keep the economy going. So there's an interim step. And then while you're doing that, you look at the modular solutions to build housing that is longer term. But let's house them and keep them out of the winter and keep them out of the desperate rains of the spring. Go to downtown Toronto and just see all those people living in tents around there.
Okay, well, I'm a numbers guy here. And so this is fascinating because I think what we can do here is what's the immediate cost and then what's the long-term cost.
There you go, right there.
There's the long-term cost.
The other thing, Rick, is we're getting tens of thousands of, in many 100%. Cases, highly trained immigrants who can come here, who come from 100%. A democratic country.
So Dom, no argument there. But I want to come back to the initial short-term cost financially, General Rick, of these people coming over, and it doesn't seem to be a significant cost. So the question I wanted to ask you is, did you get any outreach from private companies after your op-ed last weekend?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could give you the address and a telephone number of a company that will start within 72 hours and within 96 hours will house 1,000 people in and around Pearson Airport if they have the flat piece of land there that they can utilize.
1,000 people.
And that's to start. That's to start. And then to build upon that. And there are others besides that one specifically for sure.
Okay. Dominic, how hard is it to take this into the PMO and get this done? Is it hard to do that?
Well, the reason I'm sort of sitting here is the leader of a brand new party trying to see if we can change things up, because it's become hard because we've got kind of a rigid system that's unfortunately become very risk averse. And it was interesting reading General Rick's book from more than nearly 20 years ago, that 13 years ago now.
Oh God, don't say that.
How we've become a country that's afraid of doing big things.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because we've carved this country out of frozen rock. And now we're sitting here 150 plus years later, terrified of our own shadows, and interest groups and unions and different constituencies. Everyone's afraid. I think it was interesting because General Rick's coming from his background in the military and international politics, and mine was sometime in that world, but recently as a Canadian politician. But we're sort of flipping it our respective areas of background on their heads here, because I want to talk about what he was saying. That moment of crisis with homelessness in Canada is also coupled with the growing crisis around the world, when we have our now just retired, most recent head of the armed forces saying Canada is at war with Russia and China. Not is going to be, is at war right now. If we don't start to build solidarity in Canada around ideas like this to fix problems that directly affect Canadians, how are we going to build that coalition, that solidarity in the country when this crisis moves to the next level, which it is going to? And so
Dominic, what you're saying is really, yes, in my view, there is a cost, and it is big. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize the cost of what I suggested that we should do, but think of the cost to Canada if we don't do it. We're going to destabilize a country in ways that we can't even imagine right now. And that's not where we want to go. We want the cities that we're the places that we love to live and call home. And now people are trying to flee because they've changed dramatically. We want them to be, again, the places that we live and call home, including all the people that are coming to Canada. So the cost may be big. It may be a big number. The cost of not doing this and the instability that will result from it and the chaos that will come from it in so many ways is far, far greater. These are no-fail missions, I believe, that we have as a nation now.
General Hillier, did I read in that National Post article there was sorry, Don, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That also reinforces the need that we're talking on the homelessness front. We have small communities in New Brunswick, St. Stephen, a little community in the Bay of Fundy, and they declared a homelessness emergency. this is stuff which we've never seen before, the issues with drugs and crime in our streets. So we've got to start talking again about how we can fix these issues if we're welcoming new people in, which we need to for the massive shortage of tradespeople and others that in my province, we need 60,000 people plus in the next few years just to keep the lights on. So we've got to be able to hit this on both sides. And the best way to do that is with a strong sense of a national mission that Canada can again put itself forward as a country that's got something to offer, not just complaining about things or apologizing for things, but offering solutions. And just while we were talking, got a text in saying that you can go on Amazon and buy a tiny home for under 50,000 Canadian dollars.
Yeah,
so
well, that's where I looked. That's where I looked down.
Out there who can help us fix this. It just again requires the ability to say, yes, we can, and to get out there and do it like we showed just a few years ago with COVID. And
okay, but Dominic, who's the leader?
I get inspired by leaders who step up and do this. And I just think back as Dominique is talking, I'm thinking about John Kennedy in 1961, when he is becoming president and challenges Americans to establish the Peace Corps and help build the world and make a difference. And, to this day, that was an inspirational moment. And so now we need to challenge Canadians. And in fact, we need to challenge our governments at every single level and our leadership. We need to bring in the corporate world, the private sector in a huge way. And we need to challenge all of us as a nation. This is a no-fail mission for Canada. And we'll come out of it with Canada, that greater nation, that stronger nation, that more stable nation, or we'll come out something entirely different from that. And so that's, I think, first of all, it has to come from the political leadership to start with. But we have not been, I don't think, in Canada, we do not have a good track record. I'm not throwing rocks at any single government or party. All the disparate elements of power together in Canada. Okay, and we tend to have political leaders with government, maybe with the armed forces somewhat in support, but we tend to shun somewhat of the private sector or work separately. And again, I reflect back, I was in on the Mississippi River and looking at the John Deere factory way back in September, and they were talking about how one of the founding guys, was brought in by the US government during World War II to run the logistics, and thought, reached out to somebody who knew logistics. Didn't matter that he was not government, that he was not in the military. For the US military, he ran logistics worldwide and made them obviously capable of doing what they do. So I think that as a start with our political leaders, but pick that individual who is going to be the individual who executes this mission, give he or she the kind of power, if you will, to execute, to do things that they need, give them the money and the responsibility to be able to use that money in an appropriate way, and then link them with a group of private entrepreneurs, of some of the NGOs that do wonderful work inside of this environment here. I was downtown Toronto on Monday night, and I saw a Jewish charity, out serving coffee at midnight to a bunch of homeless people in and around the Eaton Center there. And it was just, obviously they were making a difference in life. They know what the issues are. They know what the problems, they could help. We tie that together with the provinces and we bring in sort of representation, as is the case appropriately for the major municipalities. It has to start with political leadership, but let's not forget the banks, the private sector, the construction companies, and let's not forget, the grocery chains who are getting beaten up every single day. They all want to play a part in making Canada stronger here and making sure that this is something that actually helps Canada become really strong in the future and not helps destroy us, as a start with the political leadership.
John Hillier, why don't we start something here? And I have an idea, because this Canadian Future Party that Dominic is the interim leader of started as a grassroots movement 2 years ago with a different platform, and it's just kind of taken off. And from what I understand you're saying, I see 3-4 levels of leadership. Number one, leadership at the political level, at the federal level. None of us on this call, I don't think, can do anything about that, okay? Private entrepreneurs and NGOs. So why don't we, General Hillier, work with you and start to ask anybody who's on the call, and maybe Dominique can send out something from the Canadian Future Party, is any entrepreneur or any NGO that would like to participate in this to reach out to us and let us know. And General Hillier, we will funnel what we get and coordinate it. You've already started to get some people in there, but Dominic, I'm gonna turn it over to you, but it would be very simple, because out here in Alberta, We have a very large Ukrainian group of people who are doing just that at that local level, right? And if we got people across Canada who said, I'd like to help one way or the other, Dominic, how hard would it be for us to circle all this together and to funnel it over to General Hillier?
Oh, we can absolutely do that. I think it comes as well as sort of fleshing out the ideas that General Rick's already put on the table with interviews and statements recently. Let's talk about what needs to happen and then put that out there. And then if people want to pick it up, fantastic. I mean, that in the end should be the essence of democratic politics, is sharing ideas and having them be picked up by people who can put them into action. So let's see if we can help in that process.
You know,
private sector. Sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I can't help but jump in and say, look, we're talking Ukraine here and Ukrainians coming to Canada, but let us not forget, there are tens of thousands, and when you talk about traditional homelessness and then people who will be on the move because of floods and fires in the spring and the summer, there'll be hundreds of thousands across the nation that we have to deal with. So it's not just the Ukrainian community that would have to step up. The leader who does this has to be part of a structure. And when Premier Ford asked me to do the vaccine rollout, he made me part, we had a task force that he had, put together and brought in some incredible Canadians. And that was sort of wrapped next to the public service of Ontario, the Ontario Public Service. And that gave us the structure, if you will, to go ahead and do the job. And there were still challenges without question. There always are. But you need to have this somehow wrapped into the federal government with the mission to go out and make this happen across the nation, and then with the funding to support that, and then wrapped into a responsibility to work with the provinces, and then challenge each of our premiers who are facing this issue, and they all are, challenge each of them to be a part of that. And then the cities will come on side pretty quickly once they see that something is being done, once they see that resources are dedicated to it. I go back to my home province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and from the very first time when the Russians invaded here, I was talking to Andrew Furey, our great premier down there, and he was saying, hey, we're going to put an office right in Poland because we want Ukrainians to come to Newfoundland and Labrador, and we want them as part of our fabric. And we're going to make sure right from the first time they leave Ukraine, because we can't go in there with the war on, we're going to make sure that we bring them into Newfoundland and Labrador. They know where they're coming. They're going to be welcome. And we're going to make sure we do what's all the right things. It hasn't been perfect, but it's been incredible so far. And that's exactly what we want to occur right across the country when those bigger numbers hit us, and make sure that we're removing this as the straw that could break the camel's back when we get all the normal movement of refugees, illegal immigrants, fires, floods, and traditional homelessness coming together. Let's fill that niche to start with, get people out of the cold and the wet, start transiting them then out to the places that need them for jobs and where there are apartments available, because there's not the entire country that is lacking housing. It's only certain areas by and large.
Dominic, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we have to talk about, because if you believe the climate change is real, we all do, that's going to cause greater impacts, greater instability, more crises with homelessness. We are seeing more wars starting. I mean, it feels like there's one a week starting at the moment, all being driven by the same folks, who I think we also agree on that. That's going to cause huge pressures on Canada, as we have to continue to live up to our traditional responsibility as a country that welcomes people who are being subjected to war and oppression. So we make this about Canada, not just Canadians right now, but future Canadians, and we show how it can happen in a way that actually makes sense to people. Because the big challenge we have now, I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the people who run the Francophone Community College Network in New Brunswick, and they've been talking about global instability, linking back to some Middle East conflict. One of them had seen that study about 40% of young people not believing the Holocaust happened, or that it was exaggerated. I can't believe that's real. He went home, talked to his 17-year-old daughter. This is a guy who's very cosmopolitan and traveled the world. His daughter had fallen down that trap. We have got to start reaching out as well to young Canadians to show how they can help with this. And something else I hope we can talk about as part of developing this vision is we have to talk about some form of national service. We have got to talk about how we can engage Canadians, not just all those groups that General Rick talked about, from those existing groups in the private sector, the nonprofits, the little platoons that the British like to talk about for civil society, the Rotarians and the church groups and all that. We've also got to talk about how we can both get young people engaged, serve their country, whether it's directly in the military or through a Peace Corps style operation that would help to advance Canada's interests abroad, but also to help at home. It helps generate skills, build solidarity across the country, and helps to give us an opportunity to make sure that we can combat the waves of hostile misinformation that are coming from Canada's enemies. So until we do that, we're going to continue to be on the back foot. And it's going to be very difficult to put forward a national vision when we have a big chunk of our population who's not listening to the mainstream media that the three of us grew up with, who are now being subjected, using TikTok as an example, to active misinformation being pushed into their phones by a state that is directly hostile to ours. So the only way we can do this, I think, is by creating the social solidarity based around a concrete political plan, show how it can be done, and then even more importantly, deliver it. And if we do that, if we manage to deal with the homelessness issue and this short-term refugee crisis, we're better positioned to help refugees who are going to be displaced by the wars that are coming. We'll be able to start handling some of the things like the hundreds of billions of dollars in deferred infrastructure investment in Canada that we have got no discussions around at all, how we're going to be handling these, the fact that our infrastructure, municipal, federal, provincial, is collapsing. It was built at that moment of wealth post-World War II, and we've just coasted along ever since. So all of these things are going to only be solvable with a fairly radical change in direction that will be radical in terms of government departments, but speak very much to what Canada has always thought of itself as a country that comes together to work hard to fix things that are difficult, which again, is how we managed to build this pretty incredible country in a place that most people consider to be extremely cold and inhospitable. So we've managed to warm it up. So let's try and see if we can get the fires lit again.
Dominic, quietly, as we've been experiencing these crises, the great province of Ontario has been building that kind of networked structure of people who want to support their province, of volunteer groups, of the Rotary clubs, of Team Rubicon Canada, along with synchronized by and supported by the Emergency Measures Organization to give those capabilities and to get people engaged in the province. It's not a complete work yet, but I really do look forward to seeing the capability that will come from it, and it's a start, and it's a very good start that could be replicated across the country also.
Okay, here's what I'd like to do, gentlemen. We're going to wrap this up in the next 3-4 minutes here. Joe Hillier, there's 50, 60 people here, and I know a whole bunch are going to be looking at this later. What is something everybody on this call can do right now to help this cause? Who could they call? What can they do?
Hey, reach out and adopt somebody seeking political refugee status coming into Canada. Reach out and do that. You'll find the numbers online, the folks who are handling it, whether it's emergency measures in Ontario or the housing ministry in Ontario or the federal offices responsible. You'll find it online without question. I don't have a 911 number to phone. Reach out, give some support. If you can't do that by adopting sort of a family coming in and helping them through that, oh my God, stressful first steps when they land here. And if you can't do that, get involved in a volunteer organization, a church, or as you mentioned, a Rotary Club or a Lions Club, or any of those that are actually helping to support. And just realize how fortunate, how lucky, how blessed we are to live in this nation, and how we have a responsibility to help others who have lost almost everything. And not only that, but how it actually is such an incredible, satisfying thing when you do so. Get involved, get engaged, volunteer with one of those groups, and help directly some of those people coming in if you possibly can. And then lastly, the third part, lobby your members of the Legislative Assembly, lobby your members of Parliament, hold them accountable for putting into place something better than what we have now for how we're going to do this, because it's going to tear the fabric of this nation apart if we don't.
Dominic, you're a politician, you're an elected official. What makes you guys move?
I think it's just exactly what General Rick said, that they've got to feel politicians respond in many cases to pressure. And at this point, in a period of time where we're not suffering from a surfeit of visionary leadership, political pressure is what's there. So call your MPPs, your MLAs, your MNAs, call your MPs, tell them that you support Ukraine, that you want to see Canada continue to support Ukraine militarily and on the social side, anything that we can do to contribute to that global effort to make sure that Russia isn't able to annihilate Ukraine's democracy. Get involved in a group. One thing I'd say, that just to tweak what General Rick said, make sure you do something face-to-face. The only way to think that we're going to get through this weird period in our history where we've come up with this entirely new way of relating to each other through electronic means is if we get back to remembering that human beings are social animals. Let's sit in rooms together. Not that Zoom isn't great, everyone out there, but let's see if we can actually get back to sitting around tables and solving problems. It's faster, it's better, and it's more democratic when you can have people sitting around and talking in those little groups. And that's been the success of Canada, the UK, the other countries that have followed this broad model that now attracts people from around the world. It's that freedom for us to be able to sit down and figure things out at the local level as part of bigger plans. So we've got lots of work to do. That national plan needs to be there. We need buy-in for that, but it's not going to work unless we see that same spirit of solidarity and kindness that really marked the first days of the Ukraine war, when Canadians opened their homes across the country. The only reason that stopped is because we stopped asking Canadians to do it. So let's make sure that we've got a constant ask that fits the seriousness of these times when we are going to be asking Canadians. Let's not be unrealistic here. We're going to be asking Canadians to make serious sacrifices in the next few years, quite possibly up to including the lives of Canadians. If we don't regenerate a sense of national identity that allows us to fix problems together, we are disadvantaging ourselves and risking the freedoms that all of us are lucky enough to be able to take for granted every day.
And I'm going to finish off by anybody on the call, if you are aware of any group, corporation that would like to help, please contact Canadian Future Party through their website. They'll be able to pass information on to me. And I think, General Hillier, thank you for starting a conversation that needed to be done. Dominic, thank you for facilitating and hosting this call. And thank everybody who is on this call, who obviously clearly interested. Please take the next steps, do what Rick and Dominic have talked about, and we look forward to getting stuff done, seeing if we can help, and addressing a need, Rick, that is not only political, it's humanitarian, and it goes to the fabric and the soul of who we are in Canada and what values we all share together. Okay? Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And General Rick. Take care.
Thank you.